Hello, this is Jay McCluskey, and I'm glad to welcome you back to now that is our fourth session of Introduction to North Cleveland Baptist Church. I'm so excited about these lessons. It's a bit like talking about your family that you dearly love when you get to talk about the church that you're honored to pastor. We have talked about the theology of the church. We talked last week about the history of the church, and today we're going to talk about the organization of our church. But before we do that, I did find, and I passed out to those who were in the attendance of the class that I taught on this, photograph that Jack Stewart produced many years ago, and I found copies of it. Jack was an amateur printer, among other things, back when printing was a challenging thing, not as easy as it is now. And he took this old photo of the old white church, the real first facility that our congregation had as its sanctuary in the snow, and he put it here with the season's greetings up on it. Part of the meaningfulness to me in this is, of course, Jack lived right down the street from the church, and they had this bell tower that they put on the top, and the church secured a bell for it, and he would every Sunday come down and ring the bell, which is why when we found the bell and we brought it back to our church after it had been gone for 50 years, we got Jack's widow, Jo Stewart, to make sure she was here to celebrate that as a tribute to her husband and to her good family. So that's just a little bit of an extra, if you would, on what we talked about last week in the history of the church. And now we have the chance to talk about how our church is organized. I was asked some years ago about a trend at that time of house churches. Christians, instead of getting together in established congregations, what do you think about them just for the fellowship's sake of it, gathering in somebody's house and singing some songs and doing some Bible study in lieu of church? And I honestly said it doesn't really bother me much, doesn't threaten me, because after a while, if it's successful and it's growing, they're going to have to start putting some organization to that group. They're going to have a schedule. They're going to have people who are in charge of different aspects of ministry. They're probably going to have some funds that they are going to operate with or share with others. And so some kind of at least loosely organized budget takes place. And lo and behold, what you've got is organization and an organized congregation, whether they think of it in those terms or not. I realize organization can bring to mind things like politics and bureaucracies, and the church certainly needs an organization that is efficient and allows it to do things well. That is required, but you don't want to be bogged down with too much organization. And so there is a kind of a balancing act of how much you need without too much in order for ministry to take place. I doubt if anybody drove by a church and said, man, that church has great organization. But trust me, a great church needs great organization, needs some structure to take place. We'll talk about that today in three different systems of our organization. You can see on your notes, and if you need a notebook, if you haven't acquired one yet, you can contact the church office. We'll be happy to get that for you. You'll be able to download one electronically from our website. But we're going to talk about the organization of our people, the organization of our calendar or our schedule, and then the organization of our funds, so you can see how these things operate. First, about the organization of our people. And I want you to see in your notebook, there's a pretty decent section, you can read it at your leisure, of a copy of the Constitution of North Cleveland Baptist Church. This is our core governing document. And if you read into it a little bit, once you get, it sounds when you say Constitution like this lofty paper, it really functions more like a policy manual, because once you get kind of past the introduction part, you'll see that there's just how we go about choosing church leadership, how we go about calling staff, how we go about having committees, and how many are on each committee, and how that is structured, how that is organized. And so that is kind of how our Constitution functions, gives us a bit of a roadmap for the responsibilities of our congregation. Now, that's not our only policy. We have a personnel policy manual. We have some policies and manuals about the use of our facilities. We have some manuals of policies about how we take responsibility for children for less than 18 years old, the minors, and what the do's and don'ts are supposed to be in this day and age that we live in. So we have others, but that's the core that we find at the top. So I wanted you to see that, and once you've seen that, then you can go on to check out a list of the Committee on Committees, the Nominating Committee, and the deacons that you will find in here. This is a process that we go about primarily in July and early August to recruit people to serve on different committees and offices in the church and to serve as ushers. Our nominating committee is picking out Sunday school teachers and for different classes from preschool all the way through senior adults. And there's a list of our current teachers in your material, and our deacons that are elected also in August. And we add to the deacon ministry in the August deacon election. So you'll see those to see that these are some of the people that fall into the responsibilities in our church organization. They're placed in ministry. Now then you need to understand the line of authority that we have. A picture, if you would, in any kind of a industry or business, there's a photo of somebody at the top, kind of the president or CEO of a company, and then maybe vice presidents underneath them, and then beyond them, some others as responsibility go down. So I want you to kind of imagine that. Now we put that model into the church, and how does that look? Well, at the very top is Christ. Jesus Christ is the head of the church. The church's one foundation is Jesus Christ, her Lord. In Ephesians chapter 5, Paul refers to Jesus as the head of the church and calls the church to submit to the Lord. And so he is at the top. He is at the peak. Jesus said to Simon Peter and the disciples at Caesarea Philippi in the Gospels, "Upon this rock I will build my church." And so he is the head. So put him at the top. What goes right below that? The next is, and the word is membership. Not the staff, not the pastor. The power and authority in a Baptist church and our Baptist church is with the members. We are accountable and answer to that. It says in our Constitution, I give you a quote there, "The government of this church is vested in the body of believers who compose it, and the majority of active members shall rule unless otherwise stated." So when we have business sessions, which we do on every month, and sometimes a special business meeting, it's the vote of the people. And they can vote to hire, they can vote to fire personnel if they would choose to do so. They can vote on how the buildings are used and policies. They are, other than the Lord himself, they are the final authority, and our trust is that God is revealing to the members of the church what his desire is for our church to be. I tell people when they want to become members of our church, it means it's more of how can I help to serve the kingdom of God here, not how this church can serve me. It's a selfless perspective. It's taking responsibility and accountability for the health and welfare of this congregation and my role and my contributions to it as a member. Because again, other than the Lord, that's the second rung of church leadership. Then there is just, I use the word leadership there. I have a phrase I use often enough that says, "Nothing happens without a champion." That's true in the church, especially in a volunteer organization. Who is the person who is championing? Who are the leaders in these things? In children's ministry, in a Sunday school class, in a mission trip, whatever it may be. Who's the champion going to be? And sometimes the champion are staff members, sometimes the champion are people of the general church congregation. I'll first talk about the staff leaders there who are hired and are compensated by the tithes and offerings of the church people, the church membership. I use a quote there from 1 Corinthians 9. I sure am glad this verse is in the Bible. It says, "Don't you know that those who work in the temple get their food from the temple, and those who serve at the altar share in what is offered on the altar? In the same way, the Lord has commanded that those who preach the gospel should receive their living from the gospel." And so graciously, this congregation provides a living, financial living for me, for our staff, so we can carry out the calling that God has put up on us. And we appreciate that very, very much. It doesn't make me the boss of the church. I'm not the boss of the church. Jesus is the boss of the church, and the membership are those who I am responsible to. So just kind of recognize that structure is there. Then we have the ministry leaders appropriately elected by the church membership. And so you saw those lists of people who are nominated and asked to serve and graciously do so in whatever responsibilities, our committees, our duties that they are assigned. Now, we have a lot of ministries in our church that you do not have to be a member to participate in. You can help in Vacation Bible School. It's all hands on deck for that week as we work really hard in that ministry. You don't have to be a member to help us in Vacation Bible School. You don't have to be a member to sing in the choir. You don't have to be a member to serve in some different capacities. But there are those roles that you must be members to take responsibility to teach a Bible study class, Sunday school class, to be in one of the elected positions as a committee member, as an usher, as an officer of the church. These are a deacon. These are things that membership is required of this, and that accountability and responsibility. So I hope you kind of see here, the church is kind of built in some ways upside down, where the people are at the top, the Lord's at the top, then the people, and then the leadership who serve at the favor of the people, both hired and the volunteers. And, we're all seeking to work together in this model for the Lord. Now I want to talk about the organization of our calendar that we have. And we have on staff 2 calendar meetings a year, in January and usually in late July or early August, not too long before school begins. We've gotten good at this. We've got these meetings down to about an hour and a half, and it used to take like 2.5 hours, so we've gotten better. It's not our favorite meeting, but it may be our most necessary meeting, because we want to make sure that we know what dates are coming up, that we're not conflicting and scheduling things at the same time, that we're not all taking vacation at the same time. So we look in pretty good detail at the next 6 months to see where things are, and then we look in a little less detailed in the 6 months after that, so that we can say, here's when Vacation Bible School is going to be. So everybody can kind of note that's the week that's taking place. Here's what this big event is going to be, and here's when these other things are going to take place. And that calendar meeting is important to us. Sonia Huddleston in our church office, our office coordinator, is the master of the calendar. And so we try to make sure she is aware and puts on our calendar software all the things that need to be reserved. What do we use for the basis of our calendars? Well, I'll give you a few things that are our guidelines as we sit in the room. There are the traditions of the Christian calendar. In most simple way of saying that, it's Christmas and Easter. Christmas and Easter are there, and so we are scheduling those holiday events and special worship services to take place. And so you just acknowledge those are there, and you make sure that you've made all the preparations that you need for that. Then there is the realities of the school calendar. At those calendar meetings, we have copies of the latest school calendar. When does school begin? What holidays are there that school is out? When is spring break week? When is fall break week? These are some things that are going to affect our timing of how we schedule things. And so there are seasons when it's better, not worse, to have things based upon that community calendar, and the school system is a lot of that. There's next the practicality of the seasonal calendar, spring, summer, winter, fall. All of them have different things that kind of are more conducive to that season. You're going to do an outside event, like we're going to have our campfire worship here next month. That is something for Rick's great in the fall, in the middle of October when the temperatures are cool but not cold. Of course, in the spring, outside events to take place. Summer and winter, not so much, unless there's special accommodations made. So we're considering those matters. We also have those other secular dates, like the patriotic service, closest to a Sunday near 4th of July. Mother's Day, Father's Day, those are dates on the kind of seasonal calendar, and we will do some family emphasis and stuff that coordinate very well with those. And then there are just the particularities of our congregation. Our church anniversary is in August, and so when time comes for us to celebrate our birthday, it'll be about in mid-August. We have staff anniversaries that come up, how long different people have been on staff, and we'll pause, and make sure we have calendared some time to celebrate that. There can be some church accomplishments that take place, that we celebrate. When we were impassioned about building our new building and some major construction work. Those were things that were particular to us, and scheduling some events and groundbreaking, and then dedication of the building. And not too many years ago, debt retirement, when we retired the indebtedness from our construction. So those are just some particularities that fall to ours, and that's kind of how our calendar tends to fall. Now, I'll section here at the close, more time to this than others, is going to be about the organization of our funds. And you'll find, again, in your material, you'll find a monthly statement, the latest monthly statement of our church finances. There's also a copy of our church budget that is listed there. So I want you to have those and see those. Personally, I would never join a church and put my membership with a church without looking at their financial documents, because Jesus was right. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be. And that is true not only for individuals, that's true for organizations and for the church too. So it'll say a lot about who we are. So let me talk about the financial statements. One of them is going to be our church budget, which you have the whole year version of that, and you have how it's broken down into a particular month. That will give you, here's what for example, our tithes and offering goal is, and here's what we've done in that month, and here's how we're doing so far for the year, and those matters. We rarely fund the entire budget. It's given every dime that's allocated in the budget. That has happened a few times. And we very, very rarely have spent more than we've brought in over a year's time. I won't say it's never happened. I think twice in my tenure here as pastor, we have had those kind of years. But thank goodness for those who give to the budget. It is the lifeline of the ministries that we have. It pays the staff. It takes care of the necessities of utilities and materials and equipment that we must purchase to operate. And it's the core of what we give away in our mission giving that I'll talk about here in just a minute. And so that is a process of putting a budget together. We'll be beginning, frankly, in a few weeks, as budget submissions will come in, and our stewardship committee is responsible for receiving all those and then presenting to the church a proposed budget for the coming year. Someone look at our budget and they can say, I don't like the way the church spends its money. My only answer to that is, well, I don't like the way I spend all my own money. So that's just true, isn't it? I hope that won't be a blind spot that would keep you from seeing the many, many good things that take place in our church operating budget. More about that in a minute. There's also in your material some things, a page that refers to our designated funds, where our budget starts over again in the calendar year. Every January, a new budget. These designated funds roll over. They stay with us until they're spent and distributed. Some of them are savings. Some of them are monies held back for future purchases, like we have a van fund, so that when the time comes that we need to purchase a new vehicle, there is money in hand for that to take place. We have line items for events like our Florida camp that our youth go to, or some mission trips have some line items. Operation Christmas Child's a big deal to us, and so to purchase materials that are needed to go in the shoe boxes, and especially for monies for shipping shoe boxes, 1,700 plus. We have that money parked away in there as it is raised and comes in and stays there. So you can look through those. If you ever have any questions about them, this is an offer I often make to the church. You see anything, you have a question, call us in the church office. We will get an answer to you if something isn't clear. We'll talk about it. We want to be as transparent as we possibly can about those things. You'll also see in the back of that part, child care ministry budget, that people pay tuition for our child care ministry that we do each week, Monday through Friday, 6:30 in the morning till 6 o'clock in the evening, from infants through kids that are ready to go into kindergarten. We appreciate those who entrust us with their children. They pay a fair tuition for that to take place that covers the payroll for the staff. It covers materials that they need, and then it covers some insurance that is required. So that is the basis of there, and you can kind of see how that breaks down if that interests you. I want to share with you, continue following on the outline, some principles about finances in our church. And the first is this is very important. It always was, it is, and always will be God's money. It is. It's God's money. It's God's money all the time. You know, He owns everything, and we are stewards of that. So when I give a gift to the church, it's God's money. When whatever I keep for myself, that's God's money. I've got to be a good steward of every dollar that He has granted to us. And so that raises up our responsibility. We want to make sure we deal with things with integrity and honesty as we deal with the finances, if we consider it not our money, but God's money. Now, a note here that North Cleveland Baptist Church is exceptionally transparent about our finances. In the congregations that I know of, I really don't know of one that is quite as transparent as we are. And so let me tell you a few ways that transparency is evident. First, we report weekly giving in our church newsletter. So those who receive it, there'll always be that place that says, last Sunday, here's what our gifts were. Want you to be aware of that, and you can see that. It's not a hidden number. Second, we document individual salaries rather than group salaries together. So if you want to look at the budget or this monthly financial statement, you can see just about, not entirely, but just about every salary. Because our perspective is this. If you give to the North Cleveland Baptist Church budget, you deserve to know how it's spent. And not going to try to hide anything. And so there it is. And so you can see what the pastor makes. You can see what the office worker makes. You can see what the custodians make. That is listed there, and the other staff members. And so that's just being transparent. We think that is being responsible to those who are generous enough to share and to give. Now, one thing that we will not do, and that's next, we will not disclose an individual's giving. So if you give a gift to the church, that is kept confidential. You'll receive documentation at the end of the year or the early part of the year of the previous year's gifts for tax purposes, but that is not something that is not knowledge that is out there for common consumption. That is something we keep very confidential and very private, so don't worry about that. Next, we will supply thorough, honest information to all inquiries. So if you see something, you have any question, you're welcome to call. We'll give you an answer. We'll talk about it, and we'll see if we clarify things. If I can't give you an answer, I'll call in the bookkeeper who digs a little deeper into these things than I do, and we'll do our best to get an answer. You may bring up a very good question we hadn't thought of and point out something we need to see. So the lines are open on the telephone. Come by the church office. We'll take care of that. And then last, we have an audit committee that considers our practices and results each year. And they meet early in the year to look at the previous year's books. And it is their discretion about how detailed they want to go in. But they can look at anything they want to. And they pull some things at random just to make sure that we have documentation for our expenditures. And when they leave the room, there's a sense of satisfaction. And the trust that enables us to have is a very, very important thing. So I want you to be aware of those things. Next principle is members are expected to give. We are honored when guests give to our church and non-members contribute to our ministry. Thank you very much. I used to say when we would have a lot of guests in for a special event, and there's a concert or something, I knew there were a lot of people not from our church. Sometimes I would get up in front and say, if you're a guest, don't feel any obligation to have to give in the budget into the offering plate. You're just present, and we're glad you're here, and that's offering enough. My wife actually said, don't discourage those people from giving. If they want to give and get a blessing, you let them. So we toned that down a little bit. But it is clear that it is the responsibility and it is the privilege of the members of our church to financially support it, and I appreciate the generosity that they have shown in doing that. I try to remind myself and occasionally the staff, hey, remember that it is the tithes and offerings of God's people who pay our salaries. And don't ever forget that they don't have to give money. It's not a tax that's there imposed upon them, that there is any obligation other than the obligation of showing generosity that is part of the image of God within them. So thank you so much for that. And it means a lot to me because my dad's a lifelong pastor. And so throughout my life, most of the income that has sustained me has been through the tithes and offerings of people, and people who just felt compelled by the Bible and by the Spirit of God to show that kind of generosity to His church. And that's a humbling thing. Next is that giving is a financial necessity. That there are bills to pay, and it's just something that you have to know that money is going to be a part of the organization. I've heard this one time, and it kind of puts it in a bit of stark terms, but even an atheist could stand in one of our buildings and look around and say, there are bills to be paid. There's lights that got to be taken care of. There's maintenance. There's custodial work. There are staffing things. And that's just a practical necessity of things. It's not some necessary evil. It is a practical thing, which brings me to the next point, and that is giving is an act of worship. It is not just to pay the bills. These are when we give in generousness, that is giving to the Lord. It was, is, always will be His money, but He does ask us to give, to show our devotion to Him, to keep our priorities right of things. There is a balance in how much you talk about money in church leadership. I don't talk about money nearly as much as Jesus did, so I'm probably needing to talk more. And part of why I don't have to is because the church family has, in years, been generous enough to support our ministries. So I don't have to twist arms or talk about being in dire straits because we haven't been. But it's something I don't mind bringing up and sharing, because you come to the next point. Giving's an act of discipleship. If you teach somebody to pray, are they a better disciple? If you teach somebody to do hands-on ministry, are they a better disciple? Yes. If you teach somebody how to minister to how to teach the Bible, are they a better disciple? Yes. If you teach somebody the joy of giving, and they put that into practice, they are growing in their discipleship, and it is a way of saying and showing that what your priorities are and what your values are, and that the greed of the world doesn't have a grip on you, because it shows. I'm not controlled by monetary things. Jesus put it pretty bluntly. You cannot serve both God and mammon, or God and money. And if you give enough money away, you're showing you're not serving it, it is serving you. And that brings us to the last point, that giving reveals your priorities. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Jesus said, if I could look at your bank account, I could tell a lot about you, what's important to you, what you treasure, what you value. The same is true of an organization, including the church. And I like to point out on that verse of Scripture that I just quoted, that Jesus doesn't say that where your treasure is, that's where you're going to put your money. That's then you treasure something, so I'm putting my money there. No, it's where do you put your treasure, and then that's where your heart goes too. So that if you bought some stock, let's say, you put some treasure of your life, some money in your life, you bought some stock, every once in a while you're going to pull up the app on your phone or look in a business document and say, hey, how's my stock doing? And why are you giving it some of your attention, your heart? Because you've got some treasure there. So you put some treasure in the kingdom of God, you put some treasure into the church of Jesus Christ, that He is the head of the church. Then your heart and your passions and your desire for it to be strong and healthy is going to follow. I want to just see a little bit, if you looked at the budget of our church, and especially if you're interested in joining our church, this is one of those things I would want people to see. What is the breakdown of the North Cleveland Baptist Church budget? And I'll put it in very simple terms. 58% goes to pay the church staff. And again, we're grateful for that. People didn't give, we wouldn't have the compensation for the jobs that we do. So that's the percentage that goes for payroll and payroll-related items. Next, you see a very proud number, 22% goes to mission. It's more than a double tithe. So that you can look in our budget and you can see that's a very top section of our budget, world missions, and through denominational giving and through a lot of partnerships that we have that we are impassioned about. I'll talk about partners in a future class that we have, that this is money we give away. And I'm proud that we can give away that much, and that we've never really had to reduce that amount in percentage, because God has always made the rest take care of our needs. So we're grateful for that generosity that that we share. And then the 20% that goes for everything else. So we pay the utility bills, we buy Sunday school literature, any equipment that we need, taking care of supplies, that comes out of that last 20%. Now, next is, as a volunteer organization, the common element needed, I think I got a typo there, needed in this is trust. Unfortunately, we live in a time when there's not a lot of trust, especially for institutions. So people don't trust the government. They don't trust the news, not trusting the medical profession in some ways, not trusting the police, not trusting the military. There's a lot of things that that have lost some sense of trust and credibility. I don't want the church to be in that list. So it means that if you trust an institution, if you trust the church to be responsible and faithful with your gifts, then the giving will come. If you find that it's been misused and squandered or not followed with integrity, you're going to corrupt that trust, and the generosity won't respond. And so I want us to make sure that we have much trustworthiness and integrity as possible. A couple of closing things before we finish this session together. First is, what the Lord needs our church to be may not be the same as I want it to be. So it's a matter of just perspective. When you're part of a church family, you don't necessarily think first and foremost, what works well for me? Instead, what works well for others? What does God want us to do for others? And if that means we need to change our time schedule, if we need to take on some ministries that are messy and uncomfortable and costly, but we feel like God's leading us to do these things, and it's going to be inconvenient, might be disruptive, again, not just be messy in some way, figuratively or literally, we do that anyway. So we just have to have that humility to say to the Lord, it doesn't have to be the way that's for my best interest or easiest for me. And so I say this at the close, at the bottom of your notes. Find the church that you think is a good fit. I've never had to church shop in my life. I grew up in the church. My dad pastored for the first 36 years of my life, and then I've gone to churches on staff as a youth minister in college. Then in seminary, I pastored a little church, and I came here. So I've never landed in a community and had to do what some folks do, and that is they have to kind of find the church that is the right match. But if I did, I would say, hey, I like the way that pastor preaches. I like the way that budget looks. I like the way that Sunday school class that I can be a part of seems to minister and fellowship. I like all these things, and then I'm going to join. So once I join, I need to take that perspective of I like this that is attracted to me and set it aside. And so I can say you get a good fit, join it, and then forget about the fit and ask, how can I lead this church to fit into the lives of those who need it the most? What can I do for those who aren't here? We have a slide that we cycle before our service, and I like that it's up there. It reminds me at times. It says the church exists for those who don't attend it. And if we'll take that seriously, the church will look a whole lot different than if it's trying to be built for my needs. If we think, how can I help this church how can I help it be organized? Get back to the point of organization as we close. How can we do our calendar? How can we organize our people in ministry? How can we utilize the funds that God has given us to help serve and be salt and light into the world, those who do not attend the church? Well, thank you for sitting with us through this time together. I look forward to talking with you next week on our next lesson on Introduction to North Cleveland Baptist Church. God bless and have a good day.